Canary by Cloud9 and 3/4. Chapter 46. Strike Back! When Midoriya and the others came back from that work studies meeting thing later that afternoon, Shinso was once again struck by that shivering fear that ran down his spine at the sight of his friend's face. What happened? He questioned with narrowed eyes. Can't say, Midoriya beamed. Why was this scary? Well, Midoriya seemed happy. And in the situation overhanging them all over the past few days, that seemed out of character and out of place. And that was bound to be really bad for someone. Shinso grinned back at him, trying not to seem unnerved as he disappeared up the stairs. What the hell was that? That was the voice of none other than Bakugo, whose red eyes tore themselves away from the space Midoriya had just left and settled on Kirishima. Kirishima shrugged. He's just happy with how things are turning out, man. How? What's turning out? Insisted Mina, putting her hands on her hips and pouting. It's gotta be something to do with Eri, right? We already said we can't say anything, Tsuyu repeated. Speculate all you want, but we're not allowed to speak a word to anyone, Ribbit. Shinso sighed, washing up his coffee cup carefully, not meeting their gaze as he asked, So, how long until it's over? They didn't reply for a moment. Shinso could see them exchange glances from the corner of his eye until Abaraka piped up. Soon, hopefully. Shinso nodded and returned to his washing up. The sooner the better. Oh, young Midoriya! Oh, no, not now! Why now? Midoriya came to a halt, turning around slowly to look upon who had called out to him. All might. He was clearly out for a jog, wearing a tracksuit of sorts. It fit him, unlike the baggy clothes he had always worn when he was still pretending to be some kind of unkillable god. Something about him wearing something fitting felt unsettling. Midoriya didn't know why. Good to see you again, the old hero said, stopping beside him. How are you? Midoriya narrowed his eyes. Fine? He pocketed his phone. He definitely hadn't been staring at the screen for the past few hours, days, trying to will that inevitable message into appearing that would say, Action stations, the waiting is over! But no, it wasn't going to happen quite yet, it seemed, which resulted in Midoriya wandering the grounds aimlessly. He'd been doing that a lot recently. I heard that you're working with Mirio and Night High on a case, All Might continued. Who did you hear that from? Midoriya asked out of curiosity. Mirio, he nodded. Night High. Still out on the best of terms. Midoriya blinked at him. Did you fall out or something? Is that why he stopped working as your sidekick? He chuckled nervously. Something like that. You know, I've been meaning to talk with you for quite some time. This really is fortuitous timing. Midoriya said with a thin smile. All Might sighed and gazed up at the sky. It glowed a heavenly orange with the setting sun. It almost haloed Midoriya's old idol. Kid, he suddenly said, drawing Midoriya back to reality. He averted his gaze as the hero spoke. What happened back then on that rooftop over a year ago? He stiffened. I was trying to protect you, All Might desperately explained. Yet I see now that not only did I do anything, but I realized you don't need protecting, not anymore at least. Midoriya gritted his teeth. You have proven to me that you can be a hero without a quirk. You have an incredible power. But you don't need something like that to do what's right. And what I did was wrong. I was as far from protecting you and as far from heroism as I could get. Midoriya said, letting the words slip from his mouth. It was strange how simple it seemed now to let them fall out into reality. Words. Not so long ago it was a feat beyond his capabilities. The dam that held back his thoughts had been teared down by those close to him, whose friendship he really could not deal without, and by those who forcefully tried to build it back up again, forming a pressure that the walls could not withstand. But it was times like these when he was reminded that the barrier was still there. Barely. It would never not be, that he was sure of. It burst from time to time, and the words flooded out uncontrollably. But Mr. Aizawa said that was okay, and he felt like President Mike would agree. Midoriya couldn't argue with that. He looked up to All Might and let the words flow. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he admitted, blurting out the confession. "I'm not very good at forgiving, I've realized, and I think that's because I used to forgive people all the time. Forgive them for pushing me around and beating me down and laughing, and now I've used up everything I have. So, thank you for apologizing, but I can't." To his surprise, All Might smiled.
"I understand."
You do?" Midoriya stammered.
"If someone said what I had said to me, when I was younger, I think I would be in exactly the same position as you."
Midoriya bit his lips, staring at the ground at his feet as he lowered his head.
"My quirk came in late too, you know."
He looked back at him in shock.
"It was far more common to be born quirkless in my day."
All Might sighed, crouching down to his level.
"But I had similar problems to you. And similar dreams, too."
Then why did you tell me?"
"That you couldn't be a hero."
He smiled sadly.
"Because I tried. Without a quirk. I tried so hard, but until it came to me, I had gotten nowhere. I saw myself in you, and I didn't want you to go through the same hardship."
It made so much more sense now. It took a weight off Midoriya's shoulders that he didn't even know was there. All Might wasn't looking at him like he was nothing. Useless. Pointless. He had looked at him and knew he had to be cruel, to be kind. That didn't mean what he had said was right. It didn't mean Midoriya could have, or perhaps should have, forgiven him despite it all. But it was just that little bit better. Words. They have such an incredible power.
"But don't forgive me now,"
All Might insisted, speaking Midoriya's mind as he stood upright again, with a great smile on his face, the autumn wind blowing in his hair.
"Continue to prove me wrong. Prove that you can be a hero, and you don't need me to do it."
Midoriya definitely wasn't seconds away from crying. No, absolutely not. The hero patted him on the shoulder.
"This is only your beginning, Canary."
Bakugo liked to walk around school grounds from time to time. He would go out for a jog occasionally too, but he'd already done that once today. That didn't mean he couldn't go for another. But screw the excuses, he just needed some peace and quiet for once. It was now Wednesday. Deku had another thing on the radio yesterday, but the whole thing felt eerie. He was acting like absolutely nothing was wrong, and there definitely wasn't some crazed lunatic running around with vials and vials of Bakugo's blood, transforming into copies of them and doing whatever they pleased. He shuddered at the thought, not that he would admit to it disturbing him. A lot of things irked him like that recently. It was all building up. Deku especially. Everything about him got on his nerves. Well, that wasn't much of a change, really. But it was weird having Deku around him in hero lessons. More than weird, it was freaking annoying. He shouldn't be there. He should never have gotten there. He shouldn't have that quirk. Nor that look when he pressed him by. It wasn't the way it was all meant to go. Not long ago, it wouldn't have been a far-fetched fantasy for Bakugo to be wandering around his old neighborhood a good few years in the future, and for that little loser to bump into him with stars in his eyes like the last puppy he'd always been. If he could speak by then, he would ask for his autograph and ramble on about some villain Bakugo had faced only the other day and how cool he was and all that usual rubbish. Then they would part ways, and the only reason Bakugo would ever see the nerd again would be because he spied him in the crowds watching his battles or something or another. That possibility was long gone. At the sports festival, Deku had only had his power for a few short weeks. Already his abilities proved to be a challenge for Bakugo to overcome. It had been a while longer now, and although they hadn't had the chance to face off, Bakugo knew that it would be even more of a struggle. He had the power, the skill, like Bakugo, but he also had something that Bakugo didn't have. Something he'd never really considered before. Popularity. For some strange reason, people actually liked Deku. You type his hero name into the internet and he pops up everywhere. It's not just birds there anymore. He's well known enough to fill up the search results and everything. Bakugo knew because he checked regularly. Maybe that was part of the problem. But anyway, with all this daydreaming and wandering about, he soon came to realize that whatever god was out there actually hated him. Because he wasn't the only one taking some time out from the chaos of the dorms. Sitting under a tree, humming away to himself as he tapped his pen on the side of a hard-covered black book, was Deku. His humming ceased immediately as he caught his gaze. Bakugo looked away quickly, shoving his hands in his pockets as he trudged on past. But Bakugo couldn't get far before that stupid little bird, Siren, appeared out of nowhere to hover before Bakugo's face, glaring at him with narrow, beady eyes. Call your freaking bird off, would you? Bakugo scowled, not looking back at Deku and just glaring back at the Canary. She does as she pleases, Deku said quietly in response, scribbling away in his book calmly in the background. Well, if you want me to be able to leave, you better do it, or else I'll fry her. Deku simply cleared his throat. Frowning, Bakugo finally turned to meet his gaze. Deku raised an eyebrow and closed the book he was holding so the cover could be plainly seen. It was titled Death Note. Translation: Fry Siren and I will murder you. Bakugo rolled his eyes and started to move forwards again, regardless of Siren, but she wasn't having any of it. Ah! He exclaimed. Just let me alone, you freaking pest! He waved his arms about to attempt batting her away, but she darted around him expertly. All this experience with villains had certainly improved her agility. Hey! Deku cried. Bakugo heard him drop his book and pen on the ground as he got to his feet, hurrying over and pulling his arms away to protect his pet. Oh, for God's sake! Bakugo yelled as he stopped tussling, waiting for Siren to finally stop having a go at him. She ended up landing on Deku's shoulder, puffing at her chest like she was all that. What do you want? He hissed. Deku gave him a look. I don't want anything to do with you. Then tell your bird to stop having a go at me literally every time she sees me. I don't know why you know exactly why she does that. Bakugo growled, prodding Deku in the chest. You ate my guts, and so she's decided to... I don't hate you, Deku interjected, which honestly surprised Bakugo. I thought you were getting better, he yelled. Something suddenly dawned on Bakugo. Maybe it was the way Deku was so easily wielding his words. That shyness about him was fading. Bakugo found himself wary of the power that rested dormant inside Deku for so long. Something he could now arm himself with. He was a real opponent now. A real danger. He realized that if he decided to bring Deku to the ground, he had the capability to bring an entire building down along with him. This little green bastard would make one terrifying villain. No, he wasn't talking about the bird. At the special course thing! I thought you were actually sorting some stuff out! Deku continued, waving his arms about as he spoke, but Siren stayed strong on his shoulder. I thought that maybe Yue had finally gotten through that thick skull of yours and knocked you down off your high horse, but no! What the hell are you talking about? Deku stammered. Then he squeezed his eyes tight shut, his hands balled into fists. How dare you say that I had Stockholm Syndrome? How the heck did this conversation move on to that? Does Deku actually know how to communicate his thoughts? It was just a freaking observation, Bakugo tried to reason. An observation? He repeated, and then again, a little louder. An observation? Are you kidding me? He looked down at his hands and then shook his head. Nope, I can't do this at the moment, absolutely not. Turning on his heel, he marched back over to where he had been sitting under the tree and retrieved his notebook and pen before hurrying past Bakugo, slamming his shoulder against him harshly. Where are you going? Bakugo yelled after him as he disappeared down the path to Heights Alliance. Hey! Leave me alone! He called back. Oh, so now you want me to go? Damn it, Bakugo had forgotten how fast business master could move when he wanted to, and they were a lot closer to the dorms than he thought they had been because Deku was already pretty much at the door. You always give off such mixed signals. It's no freaking wonder you have problems communicating. Don't you think a radio show is a little ironic? Deku tossed the doors open, letting them bounce off the walls as he chucked off his shoes. The only thing that's ironic was me thinking that explosive temper of yours had finally started to mellow out. Before Bakugo could say anything in reply, Four Eyes appeared, standing between them with folded arms. I won't be tolerating any fighting in the dorms again, he insisted calmly. The only reason he didn't literally blow up in frustration was because that would be proving Deku right. Bakugo simply gritted his teeth, glancing around Ida's form to meet those toxic green eyes. We need to have a talk. Deku wasn't the only one who stopped in his tracks, because those words seemed to grasp the attention of everyone in the room who hadn't already been transfixed by Deku's yelling. But Deku just narrowed his eyes, and after a glance towards Todoroki and Shinso nearby, he said, I can't. Why the hell? I'm selectively mute. And with that, he left. The more time had passed, the more impatient Midoriya became. He realized this and tried as hard as he could to hide it. He vigorously practiced songs every evening so he could sleep all the way through the night. The stress would keep him up otherwise. It was on an evening like this that Midoriya, upon arriving back at Heights Alliance, felt his phone buzz. And he wasn't the only one, because one after the other, Uraraka, Asui, and Kirishima, all dotted around the room, slowly reached for their pockets at the sounds of various ringtones. Midoriya grinned. Not even quirk exhaustion could get him to sleep peacefully that night. The hours crept by slower than they had when he himself was awaiting rescue. Perhaps this is what the others felt like before Kamino. Was it wrong to hope that they did? But the night couldn't last forever, at least. That was what Midoriya kept telling himself. Nonetheless, his alarm went off early that morning, and his eyes snapped open. He wasn't too sure if he'd ever fallen asleep or not, or if he had just been lying there in a dreamlike state, milling through the thoughts that filled his brain until the sun finally rose. It was time. His heart was beating fast, pumping the adrenaline around his body far in advance to the battle this was bound to be. That it had to be. He'd actually woken up a little earlier than he had needed to. Well, a lot earlier. He spent the next hour or so pacing around the common room area all the way to the kitchen, reciting lyrics in his head like he was about to have a pop quiz on them. Eventually, the other three stirred. Did you get any sleep at all, Canary? Asked Uraraka nervously. Midoriya stopped his pacing and laughed sheepishly. Is it that obvious? You've just got to be careful not to wear yourself out, man, Kirishima reminded him. Would you like some toast? Yeah, sure. To both? He questioned, holding Midoriya's toast hostage until he agreed. Midoriya sighed. Siren wanted to eat his food and was consequently biting his ear. Sure. Are you taking Siren on your first official hero thing? Questioned Uraraka as she emerged from the bathrooms in her school uniform, ready to go. She's my sidekick, Midoriya grinned after taking a bite out of his breakfast. Well, I could try and leave her behind, but... Uraraka laughed. Very true. You'll do great, won't you, Siren? She puffed out her little chest proudly, which had a few breadcrumbs on it, since she'd been attacking Midoriya's toast while he tried to eat the rest of it. Yeah, aren't you so cute and so fierce? Aw, she needs a cape. Or maybe a... It was at which point that Mr. Aizawa appeared. Midoriya immediately ditched the rest of his toast, only giving a small piece to Siren because she would complain loudly all day if he didn't. Are you ready to go? Mr. Aizawa asked. He looked as tired as ever, his hands wrapped around the ends of his scarf as if he just hauled it on and had yet to adequately position it around his neck. The four of them nodded surely, packing away their various breakfast items and grasping the cases concealing their hero costumes set up by the door. It wasn't a static shock that Midoriya felt when he picked his up, brandishing the bright and bold number 18 as he marched out of the dorms. That was just his fear. No, he smirked. His excitement for the fight to finally be over. On top of endless lyrics, Midoriya had pages and pages of quirk details on Yakuza members to drill into his head. Thankfully, remembering things was one of his greatest skills, although it did make him question once again whether or not that was a useful byproduct of his quirk or... Thank you all for coming. That was Sir Night-Eye. They were now standing outside the Yakuza stronghold. Yes, they had finally been able to confirm that Eri was here, at least for the time being. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. Midoriya was standing by Mirio. His hero costume looked pretty cool. Maybe Midoriya should get a visor like that too. Flying at high speeds was a real pain when you got dust in your eyes. Ready, Canary? He grinned as the police officials continued to explain the operation. Midoriya smiled and replied, nodding shrilly as he straightened the collar on his jacket. The seconds, as they passed, were the beat to the song in his head. One of no particular power or meaning. It was what hummed there. His quirk, the pulse of his blood, the beat of his heart, the ticking of his thoughts. Soon faster than seconds. Time passed at the rate he permitted. 8 o'clock turned to 8:30, and the police went to knock on the door of the Shie Hasakai. They returned with a stronger force. "What do you want?" bellowed the Yakuza thug that smashed their own doors down. It was more than a shock, but the experienced pros leapt right into action. Soon enough, Midoriya was gazing up at the dragon form of Ryukyo, holding back the villain's second attack with ease. "Go! Now!" she roared, and Midoriya was quickly swept up with the moving force of the attacking party. "We'll see you guys soon!" Uraraka called after them, readying herself to fight alongside Asui and the rest of her work-studies team. "Right, Canary?" But Midoriya didn't have time to reply before she disappeared from view.
Remember what I said, problem child,
exclaimed Mr. Aizawa, now running beside Midoriya and Mirio. "I'm not leaving your sight!" Midoriya replied through gritted teeth.
Exactly. "We're the police and heroes!" cried the acting chief, running in behind the moving police front, armed with riot shields, as they stormed the otherwise peaceful-seeming complex. "You're suspected of the production and sale of illegal substances! We have a warrant to search this place!" They did not come quietly, as expected. Even those who appeared to be groundskeepers dropped their tools and stepped in to protect the facility. A few of their group dropped off to deal with them as Midoriya followed the rest, bursting in through the doors of the stronghold. Night-Eye was in the lead. Although Midoriya hadn't been listening as much as he probably should have to the preparations that morning, it seemed as though the hero had managed to communicate briefly with a member of the Yakuza, simply out on the street collecting items for his supposed daughter. Night-Eye had used his quirk on him foresight and was able to watch the man's future, seeing him weave through a complicated underground maze beneath this very facility until he came across a scared little girl named Eri. Night-Eye led them down the unsuspecting corridors of a tranquil home, but it wasn't long before that illusion was shattered. He had located a complicated series of secret buttons leading to an entire wall moving aside. There were more members of the Yakuza waiting for them there. They had to be on the right track. But Midoriya wasn't too comfortable with how many heroes they were leaving behind. Their number dwindled as more and more were left to buy them time, fighting against the Yakuza alone. Midoriya needed to keep his mind focused. That was hard when the very ground beneath their feet started to move. It had to be a quirk, most likely scenario, that of some guy called Iranaka, who had a mimicry ability. His quirk lets him possess and control objects from the inside, Fat Gum recalled. Like many others, he was struggling to maintain his balance. The only exception was Siren, who had wisely taken to the air, hovering in place as she watched the rest of them trip and tumble. "But not to this extent," the BMI hero continued. "Maybe he gave himself a little boost?" Ah, yes, the quirk drugs. Midoriya kept forgetting that they weren't just here for Eri. "Can you cancel it out, Eraser?" questioned the police chief hurriedly, trying to support himself against the wall, which didn't help at all. "Not unless I can catch a sight of his real body."
"It doesn't matter," Mirio suddenly yelled. "We still know the way to Eri, right?" He turned back to Night-Eye for confirmation. He nodded. "Straight ahead. But, Lemillion, it's a race against the clock!" Mirio insisted, suddenly charging ahead in spite of the warping corridor. "See you guys on the other side!" And with that, he phased through the wall and disappeared. "No, wait!" Midoriya shouted after him just a little too late. Whether he heard him or not, he was already gone. But could he really face off against Overhaul on his own? No one else knew. No one else had seen what Midoriya had seen. and no one else understood.
Canary,
Called out that cranky hero, Rocklock.
you draw your power from songs, right?
Midoriya was quickly drawn out from his distressing thoughts. Yes, sir.
Then don't you have a power that can help you get rid of this guy's stupid quirk? That's a good point, Canary,
insisted Mr. Aizawa. It was kind of weird hearing him call him by his hero name.
I do,
he replied. Siren was starting to whistle the tune now, edging him on. But I can only use each of my songs once. If I use it now, I won't have access to it again for at least...
Just use it!
Rocklock cried. But before Midoriya could do anything else, the floor simply melted away, swallowing the heroes, Midoriya, and a few of the police officers. They plunged into the dark below, and the floor, now the ceiling, closed up behind them. Midoriya scrambled to his feet. They hadn't fallen far, only one floor, but he'd still managed to knock his head a little. That was Siren, who must have followed them down, but that particular tone of voice... Chirp! Whatever! That was a warning! Midoriya turned on his heel, coming face to face with 3 Yakuza goons.
Well, look at what we got here,
jeered the one with the sword slung over his shoulder.
A couple of canaries falling from the sky.
Midoriya took a fighting stance. It didn't last long. Seconds later, Amajiki slid in front of him, a determined look on his face.
I could take them. You go on ahead, he insisted. Cancel out that guy's quirk, and save Eri. Leave this to me.
No, stay, laughed the armed stranger, Setsuno. Midoriya recalled his name from the quirk sheets.
Let's silence the canaries. Overhaul told us all about that metaphor. It's fun. Means danger's on its way.
Go! Amajiki yelled. There was further argument between him and the other heroes, but they didn't have time for this. They left when Amajiki had already managed to disarm and restrain the 3 villains. Mr. Aizawa had even knocked one of them out. Midoriya didn't know how long they would stay like that, but time was of the essence. Siren was still singing the tune Midoriya needed to utter. He followed her fleeting form out of the room they had been confined to and disappeared off down the hallways, their number decreasing even further. Midoriya was running up front alongside Kirishima and Siren, now their hurried footsteps echoing around them. It was harrowing.
The corridor's not moving anymore,
panted the police chief, who had managed to follow them all this way. Does he not have control of the whole basement after all?
Sun Eater's back there and the rest of the police force is above, Rocklock acknowledged. Perhaps he's focusing his attention on them? Maybe he didn't become the entire basement,
Mr. Aizawa suggested.
He could be sneaking through the walls, watching and listening. So when he's shifting things around to slow us down, he has to be nearby, sticking his eyes and ears out to observe.
That means he has to be able to hear Canary, Kirishima realized. So your quirk will work on him, man!
Or Mr. Aizawa's would,
Midoriya replied, gritting his teeth. He'd really rather not use one of his most useful songs so early. But then all of a sudden, the wall sprung to life again. 2 great pillars extended from the left, one enclosing Mr. Aizawa and the other Midoriya, pushing them both towards a vortex-like hole to the right. Canary! Kirishima yelled. With a twist and a leap, he turned and pushed Midoriya out of the way, slamming right into Fat Gum as he did the same for Mr. Aizawa.
No! Wait! Kirishima!
But the wall took the 2 heroes before Midoriya could do anything more, and they disappeared from view.
Canary, the song!
Yelled Rocklock instantly.
No, not now!
Mr. Aizawa retorted. They all fell silent, including Siren.
He's gone again.
Midoriya's teacher sighed.
If Canary started singing then, he wouldn't be able to stop without losing that ability for at least the rest of the day.
He gave Rocklock a look.
Stop fighting!
Night Eye scolded them. The stairs are just up ahead. We need to get back to Lemurian as quickly as possible. Midoriya was a little less certain about moving on this time. It had been different with Amajiki. He didn't know the 3rd year well, at least not nearly as well as Mirio, but he seemed so familiar in his mannerisms and personality. He reminded Midoriya of, well, himself. If Amajiki was so sure that he could hold those 3 thugs back, then Midoriya had complete confidence in him. Kirishima, though. Midoriya was painstakingly aware of how underprepared he was for all this. He'd experienced few classes in heroics, and his knowledge of his friend's quirks were very limited. Whatever Kirishima was facing, he hoped he'd be okay. They had gone up the stairs now. Midoriya's legs hadn't started to ache yet from all this running, but he had a feeling they would in the morning.
He's being cautious,
realized Mr. Aizawa, glancing around at the immobile walls.
He must have heard our conversation about Canary's abilities. If he's still in earshot, then use the damn power!
Protested Rocklog.
Why does this guy have to be so difficult?
I can't! Midoriya exclaimed. If I make one mistake, then... He couldn't say anything more because the concrete of the wall reached out to him once again, smothering his mouth and pushing him backwards.
Canary!
Mr. Aizawa called out, reaching towards him as the entire corridor opened up, pulling Midoriya back with it as the hidden villain formed a large hall with a remarkably high ceiling. Midoriya's teacher was glancing around frantically, trying to catch a glimpse of Iranaka, whilst keeping hold of Midoriya's wrist, refusing to let him get yanked away. The hall didn't keep its shape for long before the concrete came slamming down again, moving as fluid as water as it fragmented the group even further. Midoriya was just surprised he hadn't been crushed completely. This was so frustrating, so frustrating! Midoriya had only seconds at a time to use his quirk, and it just never worked out. There were so many limitations and boundaries. There was a yell.
Oh, screw it! And the walls kept tumbling down.
Midoriya started as soon as the concrete parted from his face. He fell to the ground, did a roll, and quickly clambered to his feet, hurrying over to the wall that separated him and Mr. Aizawa from the others.
Great clouds roll over the hills.
He smiled as he lifted his hand and rested it on the wall before him. The music wasn't playing aloud, but he could hear it in his head.
But if you close your eyes...
From his hand, the wall grew black as soot and crumbled. The spread of the plague like volcanic ash growing faster the deeper into the chorus he got. The wall that crumbled before him revealed the sight of none other than Rocklok lying face down on the ground, blood oozing from what seemed to be a stab wound, with a double standing over him.
Does it almost feel like you've been here before?
He narrowed his eyes, marching forwards, the ash following his footsteps.
How am I gonna be an optimist about this?
Mr. Aizawa leapt towards him moments later, holding his capture weapon at the ready as he assessed the situation. With a glow of his eyes, the Rocklok clone that had been smiling so strangely at them melted into someone who was
Equally annoying and a lot more familiar.
Unfortunately.
We were caught up and lost.
Izuku, you're singing again.
Toga squealed, drawing a blade as she ran at them, her body molting around her.
Did you realize I would be here? I read your report. You didn't say very nice things about me.
As the dust.
Midoriya kept his cool, raising a threatening hand. Mr. Aizawa was quick about it, wrapping her up in his capture tape and reeling her in close. But as Toga expertly maneuvered herself, despite being in the clutches of Mr. Aizawa's scarf, Midoriya saw her pull out a knife, aiming it at his teacher's back. Siren tweeted a warning from Midoriya's side, but he was already in the right frame of mind. With a flick of his wrist, the end of Mr. Aizawa's scarf disintegrated into clouds of ash, knocking off Toga's aim and sending her tumbling across the corridor, crashing against the wall.
Great clouds!
The music swelled in his head, the power spreading further and further from his body as the surrounding walls tumbled to the ground, obscuring his view with the ash and sending Toga falling through the floor. With a stomp of his feet, stopping before the chorus began, the final barrier separating them from Night Eye disappeared. Through the cloud of dust, a large villain was tossed. He melted to nothing but gunk before them. It was the clear handiwork of Twice.
These yuccas are useless!
The man himself yelled, barreling through the lingering ash and leaping at a withstanding wall, which moved for him, protecting him from the heroes as they regrouped. Midoriya gritted his teeth. This was his chance.
"'Cause I'm only human!"
he cried, his mind screaming at him for not only moving poorly from one song to another, but now he'd sacrificed his chance to continue using the destructive power Pompey and lowered his chances against Overhaul. This was his only powerful quirk-preventing song.
And I crash and I break down.
He hated his limitations, everything that was a possibility for him, but just out of reach. It made him question whether he really was a match for Overhaul at all. Whether Mirio was.
"'Cause I'm only human."
Nonetheless, it worked. From the ceiling, the man who must have been controlling the concrete tumbled, bewildered and extremely frustrated. Night-Eye tossed some kind of miniaturized weight at him. It threw him at the closest surviving wall, and he slid down to the ground unconscious. Good job, Canary. Night-Eye nodded, the slightest hint of praise, taking a blow at the negative thoughts in Midoriya's head. He just nodded, panting, his hands now on his knees. Now what? Questioned Rocklack, one of the members of the police force. It was impressive that they'd managed to keep up for so long, really. Had bandaged the hero's stab wounds up with part of Mr. Aizawa's scarf ripped in two by Midoriya's quirk. Despite that, the red persisted to spill from him. Midoriya could only hope that it wasn't fatal. You lot still know which way to go? Eri's not far from here, Night-Eye agreed, but I can't be sure that is where they are.
We'll head in that direction,
Mr. Aizawa insisted, surveying the damage to his capture weapon.
I'll stay behind,
Rocklack suddenly proclaimed, resting his head back on the wall behind him.
The League is somewhere around here. Still.
If the League of Villains really is still around, added the police chief, we cannot turn a blind eye. You three go on ahead to Chisaki and the girl. We'll remain here. Midoriya was uncertain. Are you sure we—
Quit yapping and get moving, Rocklack yelled. I'll keep an eye on Uranaka. Just get going.
Right, Midoriya exclaimed and turned on his heel to run after Night-Eye and Mr. Aizawa. 3 remained out of the army that first charged the stronghold. But that wouldn't stop them. It had all happened so quickly. Too quickly. Midoriya felt like he'd been swept up in this current of motion. A force that he should have been part of but seemed beyond his control. How long had it been since he was up on the surface? How long had it been since these unnerving thoughts didn't hammer at his brain? How long had it been since he was with the villains? Since he was the victim and not the hero? But was he the hero back then anyway? He'd saved Eri, right? No, Eri saved him. She was his hero. Now it was Midoriya's turn. He had to make sure he told her that she was his hero. He had to find her.
I don't know if we're going the right way,
Night-Eye voiced as they continued to run.
We're going towards Eri's room, but it wouldn't make sense for them to still be there.
Screw the limitations! Midoriya blinked back the tears and swallowed the lump in his throat. He needed to find a way to track Eri and Mirio. Did he have a song that could do that? Come on, think. Think! What lyrics? Track. Follow. Map. Find. Rescue. Help. Rescue! Yes, that could work! Hopefully. Midoriya bit his lip. Damn, this was a slower song. Okay, calm. Steady. Breathe. I will send out an army to find you. Slower. Calmer. He closed his eyes, trying to disconnect himself from the adrenaline and the panic, slowing his breathing. I will rescue you. He opened his eyes again. Mr. Aizawa and Night-Eye were staring at him as they ran. Midoriya had never used this song before. He never attempted it. He couldn't have known if the power would activate quick enough. But maybe it was his desperation, or his connection to those lyrics that drove the power forwards. He skidded to a halt, gazing down a corridor that Night-Eye had dismissed. You're not defenseless. Midoriya didn't need to say a word to get the two heroes to follow him as he began to lead them down the twisting labyrinth. He also didn't know if they could hear the same thing that he could. That distant, quiet sound of a girl sobbing. I hear you whisper underneath your breath. Siren flew along behind him, whistling the backing tune, until they hit a dead end. I hear your SOS, your SOS. Which was when he stopped. The last note echoed in the dark. Something powerful sent vibrations through the stone, shaking the little pieces of rubble and rock by their feet.
I can hear something behind the wall,
said Mr. Aizawa.
They must be in there. How do we get through?
Midoriya's head throbbed. 3 songs in a row like this, all of which jumping straight to the chorus. Wow, it made him dizzy. He tried to hide it, hoping dearly that he wouldn't have to use and waste yet another power to defeat the final obstacle. Thankfully, one little mistake on the other side solved that problem for them. There was another rumble, and the concrete fell to pieces. Midoriya didn't hesitate and jumped right through, milliseconds before the wall reformed into deadly spikes by the hand of a man whose face Midoriya had once wished he'd never have to see again. "Canary!" Mirio called out, turning his head only slightly away from his opponent. The hero had seen better days, that's for sure. His cape had been ripped from his shoulders, and his hair stuck to the side of his face, matted with sweat, tears, and blood. "Canary!" Eri yelled. Eri. "Bluebird!" As Siren landed on Midoriya's shoulder, Overall let out a bellowing laugh. "The canary's underground," he smirked. "You found your voice again, but I can take it away. You'll risk that for Eri? She is a curse, a plague, and I will use her to fix this society once and for all." "You're wrong!" Midoriya hissed, standing straight and upright in defense against this evil man. "Eri is not a curse! That's all you!" They stared at one another for a moment, a few seconds in which Midoriya realized Mr. Aizawa and Night Eye weren't coming. They must have gotten trapped behind that wall. "Nemono!" Overhaul suddenly yelled. Midoriya didn't know that name. Who was... "Canary! Look out!" cried Miria. Siren let off a warning call and Midoriya turned his head. His eyes stared down the barrel of a gun. Bang!